Mark Selby, CEO of Canada Nickel, advancing the Crawford Nickel Sulphide Project towards a construction decision and unlocking the Timmins Nickel District as potentially the world's largest nickel sulphide district.
Mark, it's a busy man at the moment. I just want to kind of catch up on a bunch of announcements that you've made. I've got to start though with this kind of this brokered private placement. You've just announced that you're upsizing it, which is good news. Can you give us the terms?
Yeah, so it's at 85 cents with a 120 half warrant. We've had good institutional investor interest, and it's good getting some good solid institutions in the name. Having those institutions in the story who need a chunk of shares to get going is kind of the stuff that'll help us fight off the shorts going forward.
Well, okay, you brought it up. just on that, I think there's a couple of things going on here. One, which is obviously the price at which you place this, 85 cents. You've been up as highest of 120 recently. So why the heavy discount?
Yeah, so the 85-cent share price. We're doing the raise because we need the cash. We had put out those news releases last week, which we'll talk to in a second. And again, we got the kind of share reaction that we expected, to see the share price run up to 115 to 120 off the back of that, and we thought, okay, probably do something north of $1 at that point in time. But, as we've seen in not just our share price, but, with a lot of other companies, particularly in out of favor metals, you see that, that share price gets shorted right back again. And so, by the time we were ready to announce the financing, share price was back down in the 95-cent range, and at the end of the day, people who have, institutions who have money to invest, they expect certain terms, and the terms, which were, about a 12% discount with a half warrant is pretty standard, for the kind of money and the kind of sector, that we're at now. Again, I've got most of my net worth in this company. And so, I want to do it as high a share price as possible. We've done a great job over the last 2 years with premium strategics, whether it was Samsung and Agnico last year, whether it was just the TTN convertible, which will convert at $1.20 a share, or the Anglo-American deal we did 3 years ago. So this is the first broker deal we've had to do in 2 years. And at the end of the day, we have to do, market terms that are there. I think, what we need to do, as a group is, really push back on the regulators, push back on the government around this kind of shorting activity. I've talked to the premier, I've talked to a number of ministers, I've talked to worked closely with his staff. Last year, Terry Lynch has obviously been leading the charge on this front, to get some rule changes made. They've at least made a couple rule changes, but there's a lot of work still to do on that front. And so, again, take that frustration, call CIRO, call the OSC, call the Ontario Ministry of Finance, and express your concerns about the kind of trading activity that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty prevalent. Lots of people being affected by this, but I kind of think the exchange needs to step up. Everyone needs to step up on this one. And I'll echo your call. I think we collectively need to really kind of raise our voices on this. It's just going to kill the sector if we don't get on top of this. Look, okay, when you're announcing you upsized to $11 million, obviously you're not a revenue producer, but you are moving very quickly through the phases. And I'll come on to that. Obviously, off the back of the kind of the bridge loan and the convert that you've done, have you got enough kind of cash to kind of get you through to where you need to be at the end of the year? And and what will that bring us as investors?
Yeah, no, this gives us a great path forward. We expect. We saw the G7 announcement yesterday, in terms of coordinated support for critical minerals activity. We saw that with the federal government here in Canada in the current election, and a lot of statements out of Carney's mouth in terms of party projects. So we expect to see significant government money flowing by September. So, with this equity raise, the government money flowing by the fall, we'll be in great shape to deliver, our plans. The whole year has been get that federal permit in place, get the full funding and debt package in place with our partners, Scotia, Deutsche Bank, and Cutfield Freeman, and then be in a position where we can make a construction decision and taking Crawford forward by the end of the year.
Right. Okay. I think people sort of understand that this is a big project with a big capex, and that you are a small company. And I know we've talked about it before, but can you just sort of remind me about the kind of financing stack that you've got in place now and what you're going to need to do? Because the equity portion still seems like a hurdle to overcome.
Yeah. So again, this Ontario announcement we made last week in terms of a priority project, and you're going to see specific projects named by the federal government through the summer or the fall at the latest. And the key thing there, and investors are now, given all of the discussion that came up in the elections, really starting to understand this now, is, there's a significant amount of government capital available. So, Crawford is a $2 billion capex. It's a $2.5 billion funding package when you include the cost overrun facility and interest costs. $1.5 billion of that is debt. And last fall, we had Export Development Canada give us a letter of intent, another financing institution that was well over $1 billion Canadian dollars of support there. EDC agreed to be the mandated lead arranger. And so with them, we'll work with the rest of the global export credit agencies. So we've got pretty good visibility on what that overall debt package looks like. And then on the equity side, and this is the real thing, for investors to focus on it, keep banging on about it, but it's really important. The government's going to give you a lot of free leverage on your equity. So, for that $1 billion project level investment, we qualify for $600 million in refundable tax credits from the government for carbon capture and for critical minerals. So, that's 60 cents of that dollar of equity that we need. Samsung SDI has the option to buy 10% of the project, and they will get offtake if they do that for 100 million US. And that of that final 300, we've got the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, we've got the Canada Growth Fund. The Ontario government just announced this new Critical Minerals Processing Fund, of which there were 5 priority projects named in the province, and we're one of them. And then you've got InfraVia and the German Resource Fund that is also providing funding, equity/grant funding for projects that can provide materials into Europe. And so it's quite easy to work through that and create a stack where you don't need to have any significant equity raise. If for some reason we can't get all of it through government funding, we're working with Scotia and Deutsche Bank, to sell 10 to 30% of the project, to a partner, which would cover off any significant equity requirement that we need to do here going forward.
And that's just on Crawford, right?
Yeah. That's correct.
Well, you made an announcement about initial resource at Man West recently, and you continue to deliver on the scale component. Give us the update on that and give us the numbers that we're talking about.
Yeah, so very happy with where Man West landed. That's one of what we refer to as our 3 giants. There's Reed, Man West, and then Midlothian will come later this year. Man West came in as an initial resource of over 1 billion tons. 2 million tons of contained nickel in all categories, and almost 1 million ounces of PGMs. So again, another world scale resource. We're going to be publishing 2 more resources, by the end of this month, and then a further 3 through the balance of the year. So for the district as a whole, we'll have 9 separate resources. The key thing there is we really want to underscore, and again, this is part of the reason, in terms of government, they want large scale, resource additions. They don't want small projects. The country, the federal priority project list is going to be we've been told, a relatively short list of priority projects. And our hope is that we are on that list. And again, having the kind of district scale, which will make Timmins the largest nickel sulfide district in the world, and then being able to take what we build at Crawford and simply, cut and paste it, 4 or 5 times, to build, what, should and could be, the world's largest nickel sulfide district production-wise, bigger than what Norilsk produces, bigger than what Jinchuan produces today.
It's kind of interesting. This is going to sound awful, but I was at a dinner party the weekend, and there's a fund manager, large multi-billion-dollar fund manager there with me, and we were talking mining, but he brought up Timmins. So Timmins, I think, is getting that's in Europe, right? Is getting the recognition of being a sort of a significant, globally significant resource, as you guys and others are doing their thing up there. So that global significance, ex-China, if you will, is that a big part of the kind of messaging to the people that you're raising monies from? and as well as the kind of the various government departments that you're talking to?
I mean, it's helpful on two fronts. One, with governments, in terms of, at the end of the day, they can only focus on so many projects, and they want to focus on those projects that can deliver the biggest bang for the buck. So, helping to unlock an entire district by getting started on the first project, which should then catalyze the other ones, is exactly, how governments want to see, want to use their money to move things forward. In terms of investors, again, ultimately they know that a company is going to be most highly valued when you have one or more of the very large companies want to own it. And so nickel's been out of favor here for the last couple of years, but this is a pivot year where Indonesia, I believe, is going to become supportive to the nickel market, as opposed to having a negative impact on the market, as it flexes its muscle as the OPEC of nickel. And so for investors, having something that is, 9 separate resources is a district is the kind of scale that a BHP or Rio Tinto, once they decide they want to get into nickel at some point in the future, is exactly the kind of asset that those very large companies are looking for.
Well, let's just explain that kind of Indonesia component, because I think the general sentiment with retail investors is that Indonesia is going to just dump nickel in the market and like kill the price gains that could be made. So, is that what's going to happen?
I mean, so the last 10 years, they've, rapidly increased production, and nickel and stainless steel is now the single largest export for Indonesia. But, as a country with a limited resource, it makes sense to maximize the value of that resource going forward, particularly if it has a positive impact on your economy. And so, this is, this sort of 12 to 18 month period is where you're going to see Indonesia start to flex its muscle, limit the amount of ore. We saw an announcement last week that they shut down some mines in certain islands in the Indonesian archipelago that were some of the highest grade nickel deposits out there, because they were getting a lot of flack from NGOs. And it was a way to restrict production. They have a licensing mechanism called referred to as RKAB. And with that, they can control the amount of supply that's there. So the key data point for investors is, ore prices right now in Indonesia and the Philippines are as high as they've been since October 2023. A 3 or 4 week period, and you have to go back to early 2023 to see similar prices. And nickel prices were much higher at that time. And so they're squeezing the market from the bottom. It'll take a little while for that to work through. But before the balance of the year, I think you'll see 1 or 2 moves higher in the nickel market, which will, again, once people realize that Indonesia is going to manage the market in a price range for some companies like us is quite attractive, is going to, I think, cause a dramatic re-rate to the sector, and will be one of the companies that can participate in that.
Right. And I guess the other thing that gets raised with us is, like, we see a lot of these development companies from, much quoted number of, from discovery through to production, anything from 17 to 20 years. I've heard 25 years. Right? You guys are ripping through that at quite a lick. You've been at this, 5 years? No?
Yeah, 5.5 years. Yeah,
5.5 years, and moving up towards a sort of engineering decision at the end of this year. Is that too quick?
No, I think at the end of the day, the thing to remember is, when you look back to those initial investments, that time value of money, erodes quite quickly. And so, again, as someone who's got most of their net worth in this company, making as quick a return on that money as possible. So, I'm very proud of our team. The fact that, we're on track to get that federal permit, before the end of the year, which would be just over 6 years from fifth drill hole to getting that main permit in place. And then, again, be in production well before the end of the decade, 2027, 2028. And, that's less than 10 years from fifth drill hole to what will eventually become the Western world's largest nickel sulfide operation. And again, it's also a credit to the area where this deposit's found. Again, high grade is always sexy, but I think what's sexy is actually being in a place with lots of infrastructure, with a supplier base that can build mines locally, and several communities that are quite happy to see mining come nearby and are within an hour's drive of a mine site, so we can have a residential workforce that goes home every night that helps make it a low cost, highly productive operation. So that's it's those things that have really enabled us to move things this quickly.
Well, okay, Mark. And others, again, we kind of ripped through a lot of topics there, but it was really just a kind of a top up on our conversation from last week with regards to the markets. For you guys, cash in the bank, and obviously you got to close this private placement first, but there's money in the bank to get you to do what you want to do. And I think your message to people is, join you and get on the phone and see what we can do about this shorting that's going on. Appreciate your time. We'll see you next week.
Anytime.
See you next week. Okay. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.
Take
bye.
care.